There's news that a 16,000-ton giga press has recently been ordered. We don't know for sure which auto manufacturer bought this, but at this size, this might mean the ability to press a whole body casting. As many know, Tesla introduced the use of a giga press that's able to stamp out front and rear castings, drastically reducing the number of parts and drastically speeding up the production. And today, we also have word that Tesla will be ramping up a second 9,000-ton gigapress specifically for the Cybertruck. This is a good sign that the Cybertruck is ramping up, going well. So we have Hans Nelson joining us. He has a YouTube channel called Hans C. Nelson. Thank you so much, Hans. Appreciate you joining me.
Thanks for having me, Herbert.
So tell me more about this 16,000-ton gigapress. This was news about a week ago, 5 days ago, from Sawyer explaining that this is massive. It takes 120 days of assembling and commissioning. I'm going to go ahead and play the video, but while we do, tell me more about what you know about this gigapress.
Yeah, so from what I understand, this gigapress is actually made by LK Machinery, which is the Chinese parent company of, I believe they bought up Hydra a while back. And so they are using, I'm sure, the intellectual property that they acquired when they purchased Hydra in order to go ahead and actually up the game that they have in China on casting and giga casting specifically. So this is a the largest machine that Hydra has made is the 9,000-ton giga press that Tesla's using for the Cybertruck front and rear castings. And obviously 16,000 tons is significantly larger than 9,000 tons. And what that allows them to do is it allows them to make even larger castings. And so if you need something that's 16,000 tons, either, there's a couple of different options that they have available to them. They could cast multiple castings in the same shot, or they could make one even larger casting. And so the speculation at this point is that the 16,000-ton gigapress is going to one of the suppliers for Xiaopeng. And given what Xiaopeng makes, I would anticipate that this is probably heading towards something that is probably a whole underbody casting so one casting for a vehicle, and probably making it so that there will be side body stampings and all the same types of things, but basically the front and rear will be attached to each other somehow through the casting, and all of that will be one piece that then is able to proceed down the assembly line. The other option is that they could be doing the front and rear as separate castings, but in the same exact at the same time, to where you can get two parts out of one shot. And so there's lots of fun stuff here. We're just getting closer and closer to the future that Elon talked about, where we're casting vehicles the way that toy cars are die cast as well.
So, the question I have is, why wasn't it Tesla that's going to order the 16,000-ton gigapress ahead of anybody else? One answer I have would be that Tesla's kind of announced their new model is the unboxed model. And so they're going to have separate areas, allows multiple humans and bots working on each of these components, the front versus the rear and the sides, and then they collect it together like a Lego in the future. So they don't necessarily want to have a single body casting, full body casting. It might have gone the opposite.
Yeah,
that's one reason.
That's a great observation. And that's so actually before the investor day earlier this year, before they announced the unboxed process, that was really what I was expecting, was that they would continue to scale up the size of the castings that they were using, and that there would be a whole vehicle or at least whole frame casting. But then when they announced the unboxed process instead, just like you said, that means that they only want to make something that is so large. They want to keep the rear portion of the vehicle separate from the front portion, and those portions separate from the side, so all of those things can proceed through different manufacturing lines at the same time. That's one of the reasons why it does make more sense for someone like a Xiaopeng or another auto manufacturer who's not going to be using the unboxed process in their manufacturing, that they may want to go ahead, if it's just going to go down one single manufacturing line and it's not going to be split up into different parts that are all kept separate and assembled in parallel and then brought together at the end, then a single whole body casting makes a lot more sense for something like that. The other thing is that, Tesla may still be planning to do something like this for the next gen platform, and they kind of have it in the works. It's planned, but they haven't needed to order it yet because they're not close enough yet to beginning manufacturing on the next gen platform.
I have no doubt that Tesla is way ahead. They were the first to introduce giga casting many, many years. People need years to implement this. In ordering it is step one, but it takes many years for actually to get it in ongoing. So we do have news about what Tesla's doing with giga casting. So they have said that there's news here that they're going to order a second 9,000 ton giga press. So Luca Greco is following giga presses quite closely, and he said, I was told that the second 9,000 ton giga press for the Cybertruck will be ramped up by Q1. This is like a few months from now, in order to have one machine dedicated to the rear castings and one for the front. It seems that the ramp up is going well. And then Joe Techmeyer, who does a lot of drone videos, watching what's going on in Giga Texas, he almost does one every 2 days. And he shows here, this is what was taken, a photo taken on November 8th. This is a photo taken on November 10th. So they're pumping these things out. Any thoughts on this news?
Yeah, and just, assuming that 16,000 tons is big enough to do both of those, that's a scenario where you could see in the future, instead of them ordering two separate 9,000 ton presses, they could have one 16,000 ton press and have both halves come out at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see if that comes in. Okay. Then other news here, and I wanted to have your opinion because I know you have a very different approach, or some very specific approach of what happened here. So this news came out saying that GM, General Motors, they bought. Now this article is saying Tesla giga casting supplier. A Tesla giga casting supplier, and as you'll share, it's not really a giga casting supplier. And then here's another.
At least it's not the one they're implying.
Giga casting supplier snapped up by GM. So I'm just saying that multiple articles are calling it the giga casting supplier. So what it is a company called TEI, Tooling and Equipment International, was bought by GM. And if you can't beat them, buy them. That's the lead in. So it's a specialist in sand casting. This is what Tesla uses to help them with giga casting. And then later they actually even say that Tesla already have 3 other casting specialists. So it's nothing special. It's nothing to be too worried about. It has used in Britain, Germany, and Japan to develop these huge molds. But then they say Tesla's scrambling to find another sand casting specialist to fill the role. So tell me, is this a big deal that GM bought this out? Is Tesla in trouble?
I would highly doubt this. So sand casting, and we'll get into this a little bit more, is a process that and they even described it there, that this is used to develop the shape and the geometry of the casting that you're going to be making in the end. But it's not a high volume production process. You can't push out a whole bunch of castings quickly with a sand casting method, and it'll become very apparent why that is as soon as we look at that. So this was something that it is part of the process that they have to go through in order to develop a casting, but it's not something that is really a limiting factor. And once again, shout out to Jordan Giesige. So the two things that are really, and really there's even a third, that are very, very difficult, and very few people can do them in the realm of giga castings. And the reason that those articles called them giga castings is just because they're large castings. And there are huge, huge things that have been cast that are much larger than the sizes of the castings that we're talking about for these vehicles, that typically are cast with something like sand casting that is a low volume method. And so, yes, these are large castings, but sand casting is not fast. And so that's where, from most Tesla people are probably going to hear giga casting, and they're going to think able to be made rapidly and cheaply. And that is not sand casting, that is die casting. Um, yeah. And so you can see in this animation that what they do, so these are molds of the part that needs to be made. And they go ahead and they drop this form around the mold, and then they fill it up with sand like that. And so now
Really?
you have the shape
Yeah.
of that form that is made in the sand. And then you take those, turn them over, you pull those molds out, and now you have the geometry of the casting that you're trying to make. You put those things together. The sand has some sort of a binder in it to where that sticks together and it holds. And then you gravity feed molten metal into that. It fills up. And then all you have to do is brush away all of that sand in order to get your part. So getting the sand off of that casting, it doesn't come out nice and clean like that. And you do have to remove the different channels that they have for the metal to get into that sand casting when you're done. But those are the two things that make it slow. Is you have to remove all that sand when you're done. You have to clean up your thing. You don't just get to run in there and grab it with a robot and pull it out and then it's ready to move on to your assembly line. It takes a lot of post-processing to clean up that casting and make it what you want. And the other piece is that you're gravity feeding that molten aluminum in, you're not putting it in under pressure. And so it will only go in as fast as it can fill up. And when you're doing gravity feed, it's going to be much, much, much slower. It will probably take on the order of minutes for a giga casting to actually flow and fill up, somewhere 30 seconds to a minute and a half, something like that. Whereas the giga casting machines that Tesla has, they fill up those entire molds in less than a second, significantly less than a second. And so then you can make the cycle time that you have from when you can make one casting to the next is also just a couple minutes long. Whereas with giga castings, and you've got to prepare the sand again, that you're probably at least 5 to 10 times faster, if not
Oh, well,
more.
I'm assuming though that there's different reasons why you're going to use sand casting in different scenarios where you can use giga casting. I mean, that's why Tesla is already dealing with 3 other sand casting, so they also are using it too, right?
Yeah, so those are sand castings are easy to. It's a lot like in order to do a die casting. So let's go ahead and watch the die casting video real quick, and then we'll do compare and contrast.
The die casting mold and tools are placed on the machine. The mold is then closed. Molten metal is injected into the die to fill the cavity. Extra material is forced into the cavity to compensate shrinkage during the cooling process. The plunger is held under pressure until the metal solidifies. The die can be opened once the metal is cooled. Next, the pins eject the parts from the mold. The sprues are still attached to the parts and have to be removed. After that, the individual die-casted parts are ready for the next stages. Thank you for watching.
So the sand casting, one of the big things that you'll notice is the dies for die casting, they're reusable. You keep using them over and over and over and over again. Whereas when you do sand casting, you have to remake the mold for your sand casting every single casting. So you have to re-pour the sand, you got to press it into the right shape, you've got a lot more steps. And so that means that while you can make a very intricate geometry, you can't produce castings rapidly. And when you're trying to do mass manufacturing, it's that speed that means that sand casting is something where you could produce, thousands to maybe low tens of thousands of parts in a sand casting. But if you go anything above that, then you're really limited, like you don't have the ability to scale the number of parts that you're making without going to a die casting. And that's exactly what Tesla wanted, was a very, very scalable mass manufacturer, the lowest cost per part. So sand casting is gonna be a lot more expensive per casting to do than die casting, but it's going to have a lower cost to set up the first time. So your cost to set up your die casting machine is much more expensive than it is to set up your sand casting machine, but then your per part cost is way cheaper on die casting than it is on sand casting. And so that's why GM is using this, is that they're wanting to have a large casting, probably for their Cadillac Celestiq, and they don't plan to make that many of them to where it justifies the expense of going to a full giga press and doing something like that. And so they're actually going to make production castings for the Celestiq out of sand, and TEI is a good option for that. Whether this in any way like maybe Tesla can't make as many Teslas. What Tesla's using this for is they're using it to prototype the geometries of the castings that they're doing. And even once they do that, they still have to redesign those, because the same shape that works in sand casting is not necessarily going to work in die casting. And so there do have to be adjustments made. But yeah, my expectation is that all of the sand casting that Tesla's doing right now is just to prototype what is going to be mass manufactured in the GigaPress die casting methods.
I've created a website that is the most comprehensive resource for the Tesla investor. Please check it out. Simply go to my website at herbertong.com. Tell me about Sandy Munro. Let's watch this clip of him predicting that this is going to happen. That is it GM specifically or auto manufacturer?
Yeah, so
casting.
Yeah, they put out an article in one of the trade magazines that he was looking at, and this was what they were talking about was planned that they were going to do. And so this is really just him reading
like the
what they're
Rolls
talking
Royce
about.
and the Bentley and whatnot.
Sorry about that.
I'm not 100% sure whether they're going to make that happen, but I do want you to know about the 3 technologies that they're using in this product that I think are really advantageous. Number 1 is castings. They're using gravity sand. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. They may also use lost foam. I'm not 100% sure, but we'll see when the product comes out. I'll get a chance to look at it. I doubt very much we're ever going to buy one of these things. And I want to talk about how they got to where they got to as far as sand castings and who did it and is kind of like famous for it in the past. Then I want to talk about additive manufacturing, 3D printing, and on what basis or why they would even want to consider something like this for a low volume car. And then I'm going to talk about superplastic forming. They call it something else, warm forming or something like that. But at the end of the day, these are the 3 big technologies that I want to discuss today. So let's talk about the first one, which is the castings made out of like a sand casting. There's 3 different methods that you can use. One is a patterned casting, where you ram up a pattern. You take the cope and the drag apart after you've powdered it. You take it apart, and you remove the pattern. Then you put it back together, and when it goes back together, it's got sprues and cores and whatnot already put in place. Then you pour in molten aluminum. And then what happens is it fills up. After it cools for a little bit, you pull it apart, you pull out the part, and then you start whacking off sprues, gates, and pull out cores and things like that. Then after that, what you do is you go in and you have to heat treat it to a T6 condition, and then you can, and then you can machine it using high-speed machining techniques. Now, who did this first? This is the Tesla Model S Plaid. And you can see here that this is a casting. But this isn't the casting that we were just talking about. This is not a green sand casting. This is a casting that's die cast. But when Tesla first brought the Model S out, in order to reduce the cost associated with with tooling and whatnot, they decided to use sand casting. Exactly what GM is doing. If you have low volume, then sand casting is not a bad idea. But it does have a problem. When you have a sand casting, you're stuck with extra material. In the case of aircraft, you have to double it if it's a sand casting, double the thicknesses, because it's just not as strong. In automotive, we usually use about 50% more. Why did Tesla go to die casting and the expensive tools that it goes along with it? I believe they did that because they wanted to reduce weight. And they saw that the Model S Plaid, or the Model S, was going to get into much more than the original low volume that everybody thought it was going to have.
Nice.
Yep. And the other point that he made there that's really important to bring out is that, yeah, those sand castings, you end up with a much heavier overall casting because you have to use more material. Because when you pour it in and it fills up by gravity, it doesn't get as dense. You've got air pockets, you've got little voids in it, and it's just structurally not nearly as strong as if you put it in under pressure, which the pressure is coming from the tons that are in the 9,000 or 16,000 ton giga press. And so when you push that in there under high pressure like that, you get a casting that is much stronger, and therefore you can use less metal in order to achieve the same overall strength. And so, yeah, whatever it is that GM's doing, they're ending up with a much heavier underbody giga casting than Tesla would in a gigapress machine, because they're doing it in sand instead of. And so also, when I talked earlier about there's a difference between the shape and the geometry that you get from a sand casting to a die casting, the thickness is a big part of what that is.
Wonderful. Listen, we just learned a ton about how things are made. The big one is that sand casting is for low volume cars. So GM doing this is just the next natural step for them. They need to start producing cars. They're moving to instead of giga casting and sand casting. And then later, if they get to volume, then they'll move up to giga casting. So not a big deal, but Tesla did it themselves, and then they moved up. This is fantastic. Thank you for showing that. You knew that Sandy Munro had already, you remembered way back then. When
that was actually, Luca Greco also he reminded me earlier on the fact that I had seen that video, but I had forgotten that Sandy covered that. Yeah, and he was the one that had the razor sharp memory.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Follow Hans on YouTube at Hans E. Nelson. Thanks, everybody.